Today is July 24th, 2023. I'm doing this interview on behalf of the USC Shoah Foundation. The interviewee is Trudy Berman. The interviewer is Anat Bar-Cohen, and we are in Baltimore, Maryland, the United States of America. My name is Anat Bar-Cohen, ANATBAR-COHEN. I will be interviewing Trudy Berman on behalf of the USC Shoah Foundation, and I will be doing this in Baltimore, Maryland, the United States of America. Good afternoon. Can I ask you to state your name?
Yes, Trudy Berman. You want me to spell it?
Yes, please.
T-R-U-D-I-D-Y, Berman, B-E-R-M-A-N.
And what was your name at birth?
My name at birth was also Trudy. I have a full name. It's Gertruda Regina, G-E-E-R-T-R-U-I-D-A. And the second middle name is Regina, R-E-G-I-N-A. But it was Van Rijn. My maiden name is Van Rijn, V-A-N. And Rijn is R-Y. In Dutch it's I-J-N, but here you would say a Y and a N, R-A-Y-N.
Okay. And what did people call you when you were growing up?
You know, it's hard to remember because it's so long ago, but I think they call me always Trudy. Mm-hmm. And my Hebrew name is Malka.
Is your name have any significance? Were you named for someone?
Yeah, I was named after my full name. My middle name is my grandmother, my mother's mother.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
And when were you born?
I was born in Indonesia. It used to be called the Dutch East Indies. And the place where I was born was called Bandung. It has a different name now because it's independent country. It was called Bandung, B-A-N-D-U-N-G.
And what was the birth date?
February 1135.
Okay. Can you tell us your parents' names, your father?
Yes. My father's name is Bartus, B-A-R-T-U-S, and also Van Rijn, the same name as my maiden name, V-A-N-R-Y-R-H-Y-N. And my mother's name is Becca. Her full name is Rebecca Berman, R-E-B-E-K-K-A. And her maiden name was Goldstein, G-O-L-D-S-T-E-E-N.
And did you have any siblings?
Yes, I have only one sister. Her name is Lisbeth Van Rijn, and her Jewish, it's Elisheva, but her call name is Lisbeth, L-I-E-S-B-E-T-H.
And where was your father born?
My father was born in the Netherlands, in a place called Hogeveen, H-O-O. Do you spell me? You want me to spell everything? H-O-O-V, Hoge, H-O-O-G-E-V-E-E-N. And the area was called Drenthe. Holland has 11 provinces. It's one of the provinces, Drenthe, D-R-E-N-T-E. My mother.
Do you know what year he was born? Or what date?
He was born in 1900, I believe. Yeah.
1900s?
Yeah.
Okay. And
my mother was born in Meppel. It's in the same province, Drenthe, D-R-E-N-T-E. And the place is called Meppel, M-E-P-P-E-L. And she was born, you know, I think she might have been born a little bit, she was a little bit younger, 1903, I'm not sure.
What year did your father pass away? Do you remember?
I looked that up the other day. I don't
what
know.
I have is February 6, 1991.
Yeah, that must be the right, yeah.
And I have his birth date, February 12th, 1898.
Yeah.
Okay. And your mother was born...
I know she died in the month of June, that I remember. I don't know the year.
June 27th, 2000.
Okay.
And she was born December 5th.
Yeah, her birthday is the 5th of December. My father is the 2nd of December.
And she was born 1903.
Okay.
Is that right? That's okay. And where was your sister born?
My sister was born we lived in a plantation when we went to the Dutch East Indies. My father was an engineer, but he worked on a sugar plantation. And I don't know exactly, it's a very small place, Tagal, maybe Tagal. I never talked about to you before Tagal. Mm-hmm. And that is also on the island of Java. It was all on the island of Java.
Okay.
Because, the Dutch East Indies has many, many islands, over 100 islands, and Java is the biggest one, and that is where we lived. Okay.
And do you remember when she was born?
Yes, she was born September the 4th, and that was 1932.
And when did she die?
She died 2 years ago. 2000, we are 24, 22.
And where did she die?
In Amsterdam.
In Amsterdam.
She left in Amsterdam.
Okay. And you were born in 1935.
Yes, I was.
And can you describe where you were born and how you came to be
I was
there?
In Bandung, in a hospital in Bandung. I was born.
And why were you there?
Why were we there? We first lived in Batavia, which is at the ocean on the west side, and then we moved many times. We lived, I don't know why we lived in Bandung, but I was born I remember it was a Catholic hospital, and my mother loved the nuns. She didn't want any other hospital than to be with the nuns.
How did your family come to be in Indonesia?
Yeah, because most people always ask that, where is Indonesia? It was in the time of the Depression, like in the 30s, and there was no work for engineers. So my father, and the Dutch were one of the most powerful countries in the world, and they had many colonies, and the Dutch East Indies was one of their colonies. So he could go and work there as an engineer, and he moved there, and he went with my mother. It was a little bit complicated. They were not married yet, but you could marry. It has a name, I don't know what you call it in English, but he went first, and they were officially married, but then she came later, because her parents didn't want her to go without being married officially. So then we went there, and he had a job at a plantation, sugar plantation, and they lived a good life. They were very assimilated. There were not many Jews in the Dutch East Indies. She played tennis, she played bridge, they went to dances, and I believe they had a very good life. I remember that.
Did they come from a religious Orthodox home?
They came, I especially I know more about my mother's family because she was always telling me, very Orthodox and very poor. She always had to drink milk, and you could see that the mice had been in the milk, and then she still had to drink that milk. Very, very poor. They had like one big room, and she slept in the same room as where people were talking. The beds were like in a cupboard. It was you closed the curtains, and she could be And she had four, let me see, she had 3 sisters. They were 3 sisters and 1 brother. Yeah. Yeah, she was poor, they sold clothes for farmers. And my mother always had to help in it. She was very good. And if something, when a farmer came and it didn't fit him, she had to stand at the back and hold his pants together at the back so that he looked in the mirror and it looked very good. So the sale was done. Yeah, but my father's family was probably also sort of Orthodox. I know less about his family. Yeah.
Okay. So what did your mother do when she came to Indonesia?
She was the only one that could go to school. She was very good in math. She still was good in math at a very high age. She would always do everything, her bank. But she worked at the bank. Yeah. I think the other sisters, the brother, there were 4 sisters and a brother. He was in the business, but she worked. She had a real job. She earned some money, and she was actually very happy to marry an engineer because it seemed moving up. Do you know what I mean? They were a very simple family. And then she moved. But of course her parents were sad that she would move so far away. Yeah. But she didn't have to work when she went in Indonesia.
So, yeah. So they moved in 1930?
In the 30s, because we were not born yet. It might have been 31, I don't know. Yeah.
So they lived there for a few years before you were born?
Yeah.
And how was life there, do you know?
I remember
after you were born?
Because it seems that the camps were, all what I remember is the camps, because I was 6 or 7 going in the camps, but I remember playing, I remember actually when Holland started the war, when the Germans came, I remember phone calls from my mother that the Dutch had capitulated. And we went to we didn't have a car, because my father didn't have a car, but we went to the movies sometimes. It was sort of a good time until close to the war when the Japanese, after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese needed, that was in 41, and then they came to Indonesia and attacked Indonesia. I think 100 ships went to the harbor, and the Dutch wanted to fight them, but they couldn't win. So they had to they won, the Japanese won. And from that time on, until we went to the camps, there were attacks from planes. My parents made a shelter in the garden. They dug like a shelter underneath, a cellar. And we had to go in, and we had those pans on our head to protect a frying pan on our heads instead of a helmet. And it was scary, but we had no bombardments. I know my mother's brother was killed on a ship because the Japanese liked to torpedo people. He was killed on a ship. He was a good friend of hers. And that is sort of that is what I remember before the war started. And when the war really started, it was also not immediately the camps. It was a gradual change from a camp where you still could move around to a camp where you had fences around and look out things around that we could. So we started in a camp, that the first camp where we were was called Chihapit.
Can you spell that?
Huh? Chihapit. T-J-I-H-A-P-I-T, Chihapit. And that was, the families were already, we didn't have manvus, the women were already separated. So my mother was with her friend, a very good friend, my sister and I. And my mother's friend still had her son with her. The boys were not separate because later on, boys were also separated. 13 years and older were with their fathers, younger with their mothers. So we were with my mother, her friend, my sister, and the son of my mother's friend. And we had a business. We sell pickles. They were making pickles. And, very Jewish and non-Jewish people together. And we had a sign in the front and, we were always fighting with my mother's friend's son, I know that. But it was not a bad memory that I have from that camp. I remember.
How old were you then, and what year was that?
I must have been also 6, because it was
6.
We were not there for a long time. What they did is the women, they had a séance. They would sit around the table and they would try to bring up voices from the past. I remember that my mother was telling me that. I wasn't there. My mother completely did not believe in that. And then they sometimes had to put their hands on the table and then their hands would move up. They always said, my mother, Rebecca, has to leave the room. Because she was spoiling the whole atmosphere. So we were there. I remember there was a hospital in that camp. People were sometimes very sick. But it wasn't terrible. So anyhow, from there, I have to think, okay, from there, my father had a brother, and his brother lived on another island in Celebes. It's north of Java, and he had a very important job. He was an assistant governor, and we never saw him because we never traveled to another island. But the Japanese tried to go after the very important people first, the high people, because they wanted to get information from him. He knew more than my father knew. So he had to move from Celebes to Java. They got him to Java. That part I remember very well. And the Japanese came to his house and they raped his daughter in front of the parents' eyes. I remember the story. Of course, I was never there, but I remember the story. The parents could not deal with that. At that time, it was like the end. I think at the moment it might not be the end of the world. At that time, it was the end of their world. And they committed suicide, the 3 of them. After that happened, they didn't want to live anymore. And they committed suicide, and they did it in the bathroom with electricity and water. I knew it happened in the bathroom, because I had a nightmare, because we moved afterwards to that house. We moved to that, it was a beautiful house. We moved from the camp where we were all together in Jahabet, we moved to that house. That was in Bandung. And I was very scared in that house because I knew that they killed themselves in that bathroom. After that, after we lived there, the man, my father was with us. Let me just think. My father must have been, I don't know if my father was still with us or not, I don't know. Because they started to call up all the men separately and the boys, like my mother's friend's son had to go separately in a camp. They were all called up. From that time on, things started to be worse. And before we went in a camp, we decided to bury some silver in the ground, because my father's brother, they were well-to-do. They had silver. We didn't have any silver, and I still have some silver pieces here. They were very badly damaged because of being in the ground for 4 years.
Yeah.
But we buried it, and my sister said, "I'm going to remember where we put it," and she did remember. After they went back and took it out. So anyhow, we buried it, and we went to the camp. from that time on, it was just my mother, her friend, and my sister and me, the four of us. We were like a very close unit, always together, like a little family. Mm-hmm. My mother and her friend were such good friends. She was a wonderful woman. Her friend is not Annie. And we went to the camp, and the first camp was Adek. A-D-E-K, Adek. They transported us in trains. They closed the windows, and they always went up and down with the train, so we would be confused where we were going. Okay. And when we came in Adek, I read somewhere that somebody said, this is not what we expected. Of course, we never expected to be in a camp like that. We were, they put the women in barracks. A barrack had about 25 people. We slept on there were planks, and each of us had 20 inches to sleep on, very little. We had nets over us against the mosquitoes, and at night I remember that the rats were running over the nets, but we had those 20 inches, and there were about 25 people in one barrack. It was my mother, her friend, and my two sisters. And I forgot actually to tell you that before we went in the camp, I'm sorry about that, my mother had a German friend. The Germans did not have to go in the camps. The Japanese put all white people in camps, but if you were German, because they had very good relations with the Germans, and so she was protected. But my mother was very good friends with her. There was nothing wrong with them. So the husband of my friend was a doctor, and he said to my mother, "You're going to the camps, and I'm going to give you some medicine, because you will have malaria, you will have stomach disease, bacillary dysentery, and I'm going to give you some." And my mother gave her clothes, beautiful clothes. She had these dresses from the dances. I remember she had a black dress with a pink rose, and she had a white dress with other rose. She gave that, and she had high-heeled shoes, beautiful shoes. She gave to the woman, and we took those medications. We took it to the camp, okay. But anyhow, we slept in those barracks, and in spite of the nets, we got malaria.
Yeah. Oh.
Actually, the Japanese, their plan was, in spite, it's not the same as the Germans. The Germans tried systematically to kill all the Jews, and they managed very well, 6 million. But the Japanese tried to kill us slowly by malnutrition, disease, and torture, because they did torture us. Even I call it torture when we had to. Whenever you saw a Japanese, you had to stand up straight. You don't want me to stand up straight, but you had to stand up straight. I can do it. Bow down deep, stand straight again, and you had to say 4 words. And I still remember the words, and I can't spell it for you because it's Japanese. You had to say Yotsuke is stand straight. Yotsuke, Kire is to bow down. Nore, stand straight again. And Bukare is you can go now. And if you didn't bow deep enough, they had a stick in it. I gave you one picture. They would hit you on the head. But of course, especially for Jewish people, we don't bow down to anybody. We only bow down in some prayers, in Shul, in the Aleinu, and Yom Kippur. So we did it. But my mother always told us during all the 4 years, whatever they tell you, it doesn't help you not to do it, because they will hit you, they will torture you. But so we did as much as we could. We bowed down to them. The torture, there was a special room in the camp, a torture room, and we always heard that there was sometimes shouting and screaming from there. And the women, the only women that had a very good life is the ones that would cooperate with the Japanese and sleep with them. They had food, they had everything. So we had this in the barracks, we slept there. Everybody had a job. I had to clean the rooms of the Japanese. I was like, in Dutch you call it a babu, it's a slave. I was a little slave for the Japanese. The Japanese loved children. They did everything bad to the adults. They never did anything, as far as I know, never did anything bad. I was there from the age of 6 till 9. Never did. I worked to clean the room, and after I cleaned the room, he always gave me a cake. And all the women when I came back to the barrack, my mother said, don't show it to the other people because they get jealous. And we would go with my aunt and my sister to a little place near the water, and we would eat the cake. So we had to do that. We had to clean the toilets. The toilets were holes in the ground. You had no privacy. Everybody would sit next to each other. It was filthy. It was smelly. That is why we got the bacillary dysentery. There is 2 kinds of dysentery, amoeba dysentery and bacillary. And I don't know if we had medicine. The malaria medicine we used from this friend for a little bit, but finished it, and I also got malaria. So I got all the diseases. There was no food. The food that we had was, we put salt in water in order to make it like soup. If you put salt in water, like a little bit like soup, it was like a green leaves we ate. They told me that we ate rats and mice. I'm not sure if that is true, but we never got meat. We ate the shells from the eggs to get calcium. People told me that they looked, I never did it myself, they looked for snakes and bugs and mixed it, and they made like a curry of it. Did anything to make food. So we were all very hungry. And what they did in the evening, all the women, when we went to sleep, they exchanged recipes. The most special recipes. It seemed to help them when they were hungry, because they thought, how long can the war be? They didn't know it would be 3.5 years. Yeah. But they was thinking of all these recipes. And they had another special way of doing it, very dishonest. My mother, of course you become dishonest, she would fight for us. And they would bring the breads in, different bread. But if you think of bread, it wasn't bread. It looked like a bread, but inside it was like a green pudding. It's like a hard, I don't know what they put in it. It was terrible, but it filled us up. So there were 25 people in the barrack, and the 25 breads were brought in, but they had different sizes. And my mother and her friend had a different way of getting the biggest one. So my mother had to turn around. And her friend said, "For whom is this bread?" And my mother said, "That's for the Van Rijns, for the weather." If she would say that is for, she would have different words using it. And my mother's friend knew that if she used one word, that means it's the biggest one, it's for us. So they had that way. So from that terrible bread, we still wanted the biggest one. So we didn't learn. You were not supposed to study. There were no books, no pencils. So we would sit on the ground in the sand, and we would have sticks, and we would do some math with sticks in the sand. Somebody must have taught us a little bit, but after 3.5 years, I was still very. I wouldn't say stupid, because I wasn't stupid, but I never learned. So we did that a little bit. We worked hard. We worked in the fields. We cleaned toilets. We had to clean out all from the holes. We had a stick and 2 buckets on the side, and the buckets had to be filled up from whatever was in the holes and carried it somewhere. What else did we do? We went past all the barracks and told them the food was. There was actually one barrack, and whenever we passed there was a very strong smell. Not a dirty smell, a strong smell. I know now it was garlic. We had Iraqi Jews. They lived in that barrack. Very good people, but they were very brave, because they would exchange the gold and silver that they had, and they would get food for that because our camp was surrounded by it's a kind of a bamboo walls, very thin bamboo walls. The watchtowers were on the top, so you couldn't escape. But underneath the bamboo, you could put perhaps rings, and some people, the Indonesians, people on the outside, they could put some food, so they would exchange that. We didn't dare to do that. Because we knew if they would catch us, that would be the end of us. But we went to the Iraqis, and my mother had still a couple of rings, a couple of necklaces, and she would give that to the Iraq, and they would give food. So a little bit would get. The bad thing is that
these are Iraqi Jews. Or were these Iraqi Jews?
Yes, these were Iraqi Jews. Yeah, okay. I forgot to say that the first camp in Adak, we were first in Chapet, then we went to Adak. In Adak, it was still Jewish and non-Jewish people. In fact, it was very assimilated. They celebrated Christmas, and it was, for the children, it was wonderful that they did Christmas because they sang songs. I still know all the Christmas songs. And I remember my mother discovered that I learned how to pray. I was sitting on my knees in front of where we slept, and she heard me say, please God, save the family van Rijn. Only our family had to be saved. But anyhow, what did I want to say about that?
About Jews and non-Jews.
Yeah, we were still Jews and non-Jews, sang together. Only in the last camp, in Tangerang, we were suddenly asked who was Jewish. And we knew that it was not a good sign, because we knew that it's never a good sign. So they had learned from the Germans that we were worse than the other people, and we had to say and be honest. We were sort of hesitant sometimes to say, shall we lie about it? But we were telling each other, don't do that because I know you're Jewish. So there was peer pressure, and we went in a special camp for Jewish people, Tangerang. As far as I know, the people in that camp were treated as bad, I wouldn't say better, as bad as in the other camps. And I don't know what they had in mind after more time. Perhaps they wanted to torpedo us, I don't know. But we were in a different camp. No Christmas anymore. So, let me see. I just want to say what I remember as a child when we were in that camp with all the bamboo things around it, and I looked up at the sky and I thought, this is the same sky that I see as they see. I want to see their sky again. I wanted to be out of that camp. But on the other hand, I must say that because my mother fought for us, and because I was so young, I didn't experience it, and I still, after the war, I never had nightmares about it. My sister had, I never had it. I don't know why, because I know from stories how bad it was. We were actually 80,000 people in the camps, 80,000, and 10,000 people died in the camps. We were 80,000, there were in Java, in that island of Java, there were 24 different camps. I mentioned you only Adak, Chapet, Adak, Tangerang, but there were Chideng, there were other camps. I know there was one camp, Chideng, where the Japanese made them make holes in the ground and put the food in the ground. And when you're hungry, you dig, you throw the food away. But that didn't happen in our camp. Chideng was a worse camp than our camp, if that is possible. And the Japanese liked to send pictures home with smiling children because they wanted to show their family how good they were. And we had to sit on their lap and smile. And I could not sit on their lap and smile because I was scared of their faces. Their faces looked different than our faces. And my mother, and I cried. And my mother said, don't cry, because she knew it was bad. He was not going to make a picture with a crying child. Smile, so we were forced to smile. They sent those pictures home. And I think the hunger, the diseases were probably the worst, because we had no medication and people died. Whenever somebody would die, there was a bell that rang. So we knew that somebody else had died. The worst was when I said that they wanted to kill, like disease and torture. Every day we had to stand in the sun for hours and hours and hours in the sun. And they would count people. And if they discovered that somebody had done something bad, like from the Iraqi Jews, they discovered sometimes, and they wanted to know who it was. And we would stand in the sun as long as until they found out who that person was. Hours and hours. And if you fainted, that they would pull you up. I don't know what they did, but that was one of the worst things. The standing there in the sun. The women. I remember the women. There was nobody looked like a woman anymore. After you don't eat for 2.5 years, you know, you didn't have bras or something. You don't need a bra anymore. We were so thin, and actually, from the lack of vitamin, that you have, there was a disease that children had. I think it was called beriberi. I think it's called beriberi. So you had big tummies. You would think that you had so much food, but it was because you had no food. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the diseases were horrible. But my mother tried to look after us as well as she could. She would tell us stories, and I think it was a very big support that she had her friend with her. It was very important. And we didn't know many other people in the camp. I think it was just our little family. Don't remember anything about my sister. Don't know what she did for 3.5 years. Don't remember her. It's funny.
Where was your father at this time?
My father, all the men were separated. Boys 13 and over were separated. They were with the men. And some of these men would look after they were not always with their own fathers, but the other men would look after them. We did not know where they were. Mm-hmm. We had no communications. There were no cards, no letters. I think I've read somewhere that some cards were sent that there was like, you could only fill in, our life is good, wonderful, mm-hmm. Some words that you could choose, but nothing was, our life is bad. But we didn't know where they were. And we were so busy in that camp. I don't know if I ever told my mother, I don't know if she missed him. They didn't have such a wonderful marriage to start with. Mm-hmm. And actually after the war, she was fighting for so long for us. She had become so independent. They lived for a couple of years, I think, together, and they got a divorce. Many divorces after the war, because the women were they were fighting like lions for their children. And I think the women were stronger in trying to survive than the men, somehow. I think so. Mm-hmm. And I think, let me just see if I...
Did you study at all? Did you have any schooling?
I didn't study at all.
At all?
No,
there was no chance.
I knew I didn't know anything when I came out of the war. I probably forget to tell you many things, but afterwards, we didn't keep up with the years, but we knew there was a certain time that the Japanese told us not to bow down anymore. So we couldn't understand, why don't we bow down? That was the beginning of the end of the war, because they didn't want us to do it. And they had parachutes coming down with food, and sometimes the parachutes, I remember, didn't open. They killed some people because the parachute had a box of food. Mm. So when it doesn't open, it falls on somebody. And but some opened up and they had chocolate and they had cigarettes for the women, from everything. Actually, when we made food, some people tried to make cigarettes from thin paper with sand in it. I don't know how they light it. I don't know if we had matches, but they made cigarettes, so they had cigarettes and chocolate. And the one very good thing that I remember after the war was that the British rescued us, the British and the Gurkhas. The Gurkhas are people that they served under the with the British from Nepal, people from Nepal. They had these turbans on and they had these thick stockings that you put around your legs, very high up. And of course, we thought they were wonderful. We hadn't seen men for so long. Yeah. For the women, must have been wonderful. They must have kissed those men, the British and the Gurkhas. And then they decided for the children, they had warships in the harbor. At the end, we must have been close to the harbor. It must have been, we were back in Batavia, because you have Batavia and Bandung. We were in a camp also in Bandung, but they took us in big trucks. And the trucks went to the harbor and they had warships. And we were a big group of kids, maybe we had 40 kids. And they put us on the deck. And on the deck of the ships they had swings, huge swings. And on the side of the ship, of the deck, they had put big nets so that you couldn't, there was like on a ship you have the railing, that you couldn't fall over, so they protected us. And they would push us on the swings, and we had such a wonderful time. But not only that, they gave us chocolate and candy and all the good things that we never had. But they didn't think that if you don't eat all those things for 3.5 years, you get sick. So we got so sick on the way back in the camp after we ate all that. But I don't remember being sick. I remember the wonderful time we had on the ship with the swings. It was wonderful. So,
how were you liberated? How did you know the war was over and you were liberated?
We knew because we didn't bow down anymore. We heard rumors. The parachutes came down with boxes with food. That was sort of the end of the war. It was like the end. It seemed the 3.5 years. We went in. The camp started in March 41, and it ended in August 44, I believe. Might be a little bit wrong with the dates. And after the war, the second danger after the war was that outside the camp there were the Indonesian nationalists. The Dutch, it was a colony of the Dutch. They didn't like the Dutch. Even that we helped to make their country probably better, they hated us. And it was very dangerous for women to be outside the camp. And I think from the numbers that there were 30,000 women that were taken by nationalists that they couldn't get to until a later date. But my mother didn't venture out because she was scared of everything. My mother, she's not very brave, but she saved us by being like that. So after the camps, the men and women were brought together, and we met my father. Some men had changed so much, lost so much weight that they didn't recognize. I think my mother still recognized my father. And we were put on ships to the Netherlands. And the ships, our ship was called the Oranje. I think it's Orange. And we were very underfed. Of course, we were sick and underfed. And on the ship, there was measles broke out among the children. And when you have measles, and you have children that haven't eaten, they can die from that. And many kids died on the ship from measles. And I remember we were sleeping actually in hangmats. It's hammocks. It's not called a hangmat. I don't know what it's called. And so in order to bury the children in the ocean, at sea, they had planks. And they would tie children on the planks and the plank would just go down with ropes. It was terrible, and my mother was horrified and scared that she would save her children through 3.5 years, and then they would die from measles on the ship. But we didn't die, of course, we didn't die. And we, during the trip to Holland, we had nothing. We had just what we wore, and the Suez Canal. At the Suez Canal we stopped, and they gave us one set of clothes. I got a little skirt and a little top, and we got a blanket. That is all we got. Yeah. When we came to Holland, they made us pay for that. But I don't know from what money, but they were not good. But anyhow, we got some clothes, we went to Holland, and I think the worst, for my mother's place, probably the worst was that when we came to Holland, we had no relatives left. Because close to 90%, I think it's 85 or 90% of the Dutch Jews were killed by the Nazis. And my mother, we had no place to live, and she had 2 sisters left. The brother was killed, the parents were killed, another sister was killed, and the one sister that survived was hiding. The other sister was in a camp. She came out of the camp, and I remember so well. She still came she also was from Hogeveen, like my mother. She has still her little house, because we went to Indonesia, but she lived there. And she said to my mother, Becca, she called her Becca. And she opened her the cupboard, and she says, whatever I have is for you and for me. We share everything I have. She was such a wonderful woman. She had suffered so much in the camps that she had become blunt. She didn't hate the Germans even anymore. She didn't hate them. She actually remarried. Her husband was killed. She remarried a German, a butcher. And he was not a butcher. He was handling cattle. And she married him. I remember him because we went to visit them when she married him. But my mother couldn't understand how she could marry him. But she survived the war. She was like they did, doctors worked on her. They did all kinds of operations. I don't know what they did. She suffered. She was so scared of people that when we would go to her house and visit her, and somebody would come and visit, if you have a house and it has like a little, here the window goes from the top to the bottom, but it will have like a little wall here, she would hide underneath there so that people would think that she's not home. She had become abnormal, but she loved my mother, and my mother loved her, and they always gave each other names at home, like little animals' names. She called her. She loved my mother to pieces. And we, after the war, actually, the other sister got killed. One sister got killed, but her children of this sister were hiding in a monastery, had become Catholics. So my mother went to see, the son was there. And the son was there, the daughter was somewhere else. And my mother didn't have money to take him in and to look after him. It should be, she probably should have done that, but she had no money. And the son actually did not want my mother. He wanted to stay Catholic. They want not to get back to Judaism. So we still visited him for some time. Some of the children that lost their parents went in a special home. It's not an orphanage, but it's a place where the children go. And my cousin, my name is also Trudy, she's also from my mother's sister, also Gertrude from the grandmother. She was there, and she still lives in Israel now. She started to live in Beersheba like you were, and then she moved, and she lives now in Herzliya. She married, she had children. And so we lived there, and it was very difficult for us. In the first place, we had no money. We had all kinds of skin diseases. I don't know, it's what we had from after the war. And the school was the worst, because we were 11 years old, 7 to 11, yeah. And when you go to high school, you have to do an exam. And I don't know how could I do an exam and not only learn with a pencil probably learned how it's 5 and 5 is 10. So anyhow, there was this one teacher that said to my mother, I'm going to work with her, I'm going to teach her everything she has to do for that exam. He had confidence in me. I still remember him. They were both teachers, he and his wife. And they taught me. And they pushed all the knowledge in my head, and I did that exam and I did well, and I went to high school. Don't know how I did it. We still had to go for 1 year to elementary school, but the kids were all laughing about us because we gave such bad answers. So when we came back, actually after the war, one of the complications of measles is middle ear infection. And I got a middle ear infection after the war in Meppel, where we lived for some time, where my mother's sister was, and had to go to the hospital. And because I had an infectious disease, measles, I could not be with the children. I had to be with the adults. And I did not want to be with the adults. I wanted to be with the children. And I don't know how I did it. I ran away. I ran away from the hospital. Oh. I ran away home. I came home. And my father had no family left. Everybody, my mother still had a sister left, but 2 sisters. My father had no family left. One son of a brother was left, and he was a doctor. He was in Hogeveen, and he had treated me. So he treated me, and ultimately I got better from that, from the middle ear infection. And my mother said you should go back to the hospital. I wasn't going to go back. So we lived there, and we went to high school, and my parents got divorced, and we moved. My mother actually, I could not. Then I went after school. I couldn't go to college. I had no money, so I started to work from my 17th. After high school, 16, 17, I started to work in an office. I didn't know how to type.
This was in Amsterdam?
No, we had moved from Amsterdam to Haarlem. Oh, Haarlem. And I actually went to school. We lived in Haarlem, and there were no houses in Holland enough for families, so we lived with many families in one house. And my mother lived with the 2 of us, 2 children. My mother's friend had gone back to her husband, with her husband, because he came back after the war. The son also survived. So we had to live in that little house with an older couple. And I remember that in the morning there was no shower, we had to wash ourselves downstairs in the kitchen. And this older man would be there, and my mother was very upset, and she said, and you disappear. When my kids are washing themselves, I don't want you to be there. She kept on this, of course, protecting us, okay? So we lived there, and we couldn't go to school. We couldn't, after high school, couldn't go to college. I always wanted to be in education, sport, do something, but I went in the office. I worked as a typist, and I did so badly. I think I told you. I did so many papers, I tapped it again and put it in the trash. Another one, put it in the trash. And at the end of the day, I put all the papers in my bag, so he would not know how much paper I used. but he still liked me. But after that, I went to school. I went to evening school, and you could work in daytime and go to school. And I learned to be a medical technologist, bacteriology. I learned, and I worked later on in electron microscopy, and I got a job. I got a job in one of the quinine is what you use for malaria, right? Quinine. So I worked in that factory, and from that I went to a university lab somewhere. I worked in bacteriology. I helped somebody to write his thesis, a doctor, I helped him. And from there, in the same building, I went from bacteriology to electron microscopy. I had to do special course for that in Sweden to cut material. You use a microtome, you had to use that. I went to a course there. And I did very well. The only thing that was very difficult, that even after the war, the anti-Semitism that I felt. In high school, I was the only Jewish girl in my class. Wow. I never told anybody that I was Jewish. Because I thought, I cannot do that. I heard them talk sometimes, and I thought, if they know that I'm Jewish, I never told anybody. There was one teacher, Mr. Davidson, of course his name is Jewish, he was Jewish, and I liked him only because he was Jewish. But anti-Semitism was very bad. In the work, when I worked in a lab, there was one girl, I worked in pharmacology. Pharmacology is you work with animals, you work with rats and mice. I didn't know what the word pharmacology meant. So when I applied for the job, he says, do you know that you have to pharmacology, what it means? And I said, but I'm very scared of mice. He said, I thought this is the end of my job. But I worked in that, and I got a very good friend, and my friend that I worked with, she was Indonesian, her parents were probably intermarried Dutch to an Indonesian, so her skin was brown. So we were both, she had a brown skin, I was Jewish. And there was a girl that worked in the lab that was against black people, she was against Jewish people, and she insulted us both so much. She said that the girl, my friend Tina, that she put powder on her skin every day to look less brown. And I didn't know what to do. She talked about the Jewish people. So I went to my boss, the professor, Professor de Jong. And he said to me, he said, Trudy, what do you want me to do? You want me to fire her? You want me to talk to her? I said, I don't want you to fire her. I didn't want to be guilty of her being fired, but he talked to her. So anyhow, she stayed there, but we felt the anti-Semitism very, very badly. And I did very well at that lab. I did very well in electron microscopy. The difficult thing was there was nobody to go out with, because all the boys, there were not many Jewish kids. There was one Jewish boy that liked me, but I didn't like him at all. And I also felt that we were so assimilated. We were not celebrating, not Hanukkah, not Rosh Hashanah, nothing. But we saw Christmas trees. And I always felt that lack of identity, that I didn't belong to a group, I didn't belong to anybody. And I always thought, when I get married to a Jewish person, and my children will grow up and will know that they are Jewish. So anyhow, I thought about going to Israel, because for me that was the answer. And when I went to Israel for the first time, I went with a group. And I actually fell in love with my madrich, with the leader, and he fell in love with me. And we were going to get married, but he had lost his parents in the war, and he was manic depressive. He was depressed he had a disease because of that loss. And and that when we were going to get married, and I thought I cannot do this, because sometimes he was high and sometimes he was down and didn't talk. I thought, I can't do it. And I was going to Israel already to get married to him. I had all my stuff with me. And I finished it. Oh, I forgot to tell you, on our first trip to Israel, we were there for about a couple of weeks. We worked in the kibbutz, and we visited the Weizmann Institute.
So when was this? What year was this?
That was my first trip to Israel. I must have been about 24.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was a wonderful trip. Actually, the Dutch girls were not spoiled, but the British and the American girls were very, very spoiled. I remember after working in the kibbutz, they all had towels on their head because the heat And I couldn't believe it. One said, I'm going to die, and I called the nurse in the middle of the night, and the nurse said, just know, you can't, only when somebody dies, you can call me. You don't call us anymore. There's nothing wrong with them. But anyhow, we went to the Weizmann Institute, and there was a woman there, and she heard what I did, and she said, Trudy, you go back to Holland, you come back, you have a job here. I said, what do you mean I have a job here? I haven't talked to the boss, I haven't talked to the professor. She said she was a woman that was important there. She said, you come back and you have a job. And her name was Mirjam. And I actually went back to Holland, and I was going to come, and I went back to Holland knowing I was going to get married, and I had a job. Everything was so wonderful. But I finished with my friend Mechel, and I thought, I'm not going back to Holland because everybody is going to be sorry for me. You want me to stop talking?
No, keep going.
She said, I thought everybody's going to be sorry for me because I'm not getting married. But I thought, I'm staying here, I have a job, and I am looking for a place to live. First I thought I live in Tel Aviv because that is where the life is, where you meet somebody. But the girls that I met said to me, you can share an apartment, but we don't want any crying at night, because they knew I wasn't getting married. I said to myself, I don't want to share any place with those girls. And I decided to stay in the place where I worked in Weizmann, Rehovot, small place. And I found a nice English girl, and we shared an apartment. She was a teacher, and I was working in the Weizmann, and every night we came home. She cried because the children were so bad in Israel, and I cried because I could not understand Hebrew. And of course in the Weizmann they talk English, but still they would tell jokes. I didn't know to laugh. If I laughed, they would tell me, what is the joke about? If I didn't laugh, but they were so good to me. They were wonderful, wonderful people. And
after the war, I mean, when you were in Holland and then when you came to Israel, did you talk at all about what your war experiences, what you had gone through?
I did not talk about war experience. The only thing I will never forget is when I went from dark times, it's like going from the dark to the light. When I came to Israel and I knew that everybody was Jewish, and that the trash people were Jewish, and the people that delivered the newspaper were Jewish, and I thought, I can marry somebody that delivers trash, it's Jewish. So that feeling of being in Israel, that I will never forget. I did not talk much about the camps. And the most wonderful thing that happened to me is that only a couple of months after I came to Israel, I met my husband. That was really beshared and was the most wonderful thing that could happen to me. And actually, I remember that when he told his father that he had met somebody, and my name was Van Rijn. It's a very non-Jewish name. Right. And he didn't believe that I was Jewish. I think after we met, he still asked me questions from the Bible. I didn't know much about the Bible because I never learned Mass or whatever. I also didn't learn from the Bible. So when we came to Israel, I learned Hebrew on the street. I went to an Opan for a very short time, and Israel. That was the good years of Israel, because it was 60. We got married in 64, so it must have come in 63. They were very good years in Israel. People, we lived very happily together with the Arabs. We sat in the bus next to the Arabs. It was wonderful. It was we knew why we came. We wanted to be there. We wanted to be with Jewish people, and of course the going close to the 6-day war was even better, because it was a terrible scare. But after 6 days, we won it, and people were they were so proud of us, of each other. I remember my mother wrote in the 6-day war, I want you to come back to Holland before the war started. She knew there was a war coming. She wanted me to be safe with the children, and I said, no. I said, why do we have soldiers? What do they fight for if we leave? So that was the last thing I wanted to do, and whatever.
So So you didn't talk about your war experiences, even in Israel?
No, I never talked. I know my sister always had nightmares and she wanted to talk about, we sang songs to each other, we learned songs in the camps, beautiful songs that I still know now, beautiful songs, happy songs. We are children, we're working hard, but it's not so bad for us. Somebody that would know Dutch would enjoy hearing those songs. But I never, with her I talked about it, but she had nightmares about it. So, and my mother also didn't want to talk much about the war anymore. It was such a bad experience that we wanted to get it out of our mind, away from us. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So when did you get married? And did you get married in Israel?
In 64, because our first child was born in 65. Yeah, we got married in 64. When we met, we got married very soon after that. We met in February and we got married in September. Our parents were somewhere else. His parents were in South Africa. My parents were in Holland. We couldn't go to them and they would not say, it's good for you, it's not good for me. So we made up our own mind. Wolf had a wonderful family there in Israel that they met me and they sort of knew that it was good for him. And actually, I remember the girl that brought us together, Wolf and me, because she was in an opan. And she knew Wolf probably one day longer than me. But when she found out that Wolf wanted to go out with me, and when he called me, I said, is Riek also coming? She said, no. He said, she's not coming, we're going out. I said, but she's going to be so upset. She was so jealous that she came to me and she said, just know what you are starting with, because he's a doctor and all the nurses in the hospital are all his girlfriends. And I didn't know what to do because I had no other people that knew him. So I went to him and I said, this is what Riek is telling me. And he says, I'm not going to tell you anything, you find out for yourself. So, and then he invited me for Pesach to his family, and I thought, if all the nurses are his girlfriends, why does he go to his family for Pesach? Yeah. So I knew it was just talk from her. And that was in 1964. I came in 63, and then I met him very soon after that. Yeah.
So your first, all of your children were born in Israel?
All our kids were born in Israel.
Okay.
And yeah, after I had one child, I thought I would never have another child, because the hospitals in Israel at that time were terrible. They had no anesthetics, nothing. And they said to me, we can scream louder than what you do. That is what they said to me. And there was nobody there to hold your hand. He couldn't be with me because there were like 8, 10 women in a room. And they call for they were from primitive countries, from Tuna, from Morocco. They don't say mommy, mommy when you have pain, they call for their father. Mm-hmm. I was the one that said mommy, mommy. Mm-hmm. And it was a terrible experience, but I had another one and I had another one.
What are the names of your 3 children?
The oldest one is called Eitan. They all have Hebrew names. Eitan Meir. Meir is, I think, after my husband's family. I'm not sure. Eitan Meir. Second is called Avishai. Avishai means the son of God. Avi, my father. Shai is a present. Avishai. And the third one is called Micha. 60s, was born in 66.
So how long did you live in Israel?
We lived in Israel from 64. I went to 60, we got married 64 till 1970. In 1970, Wolf was offered a fellowship in the States in epilepsy somewhere. And he accepted that epilepsy. I always told him I don't want to go to America. I'll go to Australia anytime, not America. But we went to America and we went in 1970. And we lived from 1970 to 1975. We lived in America, and we made very good friends. We made very little money, but he was very happy in his work. He learned a lot. He worked with a very famous professor in epilepsy, Dr. Livingston, and I worked a little bit in the beginning. I had to do all my exams again from being a technologist, and I didn't want to do that. So I went back to school. I went to university, and I started to study gerontology, 2-year course to work with older people. And we had 5 very good years, but we always planned to go back to Israel. We never wanted to stay here. And we never bought real furniture. We bought simple furniture. We bought a television and a thing. We kept it in the original boxes. We put the boxes in the bedroom. But when they robbed our house, they found the boxes and they put the television in. They must have been an inside job that they knew where they stole it as. But we went back to Israel. And to go back to Israel after 5 years in the States is not easy, because people always think that we had become rich, but we didn't become rich. But the human relations here are different than in Israel. The bureaucracy, when we came back in 1975, right? 1970, 75, the bureaucracy was unbelievable. It was after the Yom Kippur War. People were bitter. And it was so difficult. The children had hard time in school. They couldn't write a plus sign. Our plus sign is like a cross, right? In Israel, you write a plus sign, a line, and then the line has to stop at the cross line, because otherwise you can't write a cross in Israel. So they told me that my child had to go back from 2nd to 1st grade. He can't write a plus sign. He writes the 7 and he crosses the 7. Do we cross the 7 here?
No.
No, we didn't cross. There was something wrong the way he wrote. And you know, it was just, they said to me that one teacher, I didn't talk to your child for three days, but I think I get him to talk now. I said, you didn't talk to him? She said, no, he doesn't talk Hebrew. I said, but you talk English. You talk English to him to make him feel good. It was a very hard time for us, and very soon I didn't want to live there. It was just too difficult. Wolf was happy in his job, and I was very unhappy in all the social things with the kids, and we decided to go back. And we had a lift. A lift is a big box that you take with, and we didn't, did we unpack the lift? No, we unpacked it. We started to make boxes. Very soon we started to make boxes and send it back to Israel. And our friends were so happy. But it was very difficult for us to decide to go back, because I loved Israel, but I didn't like the way we used to live.
Yeah.
You know, we were spoiled with human relations here in the States. Okay, it was very difficult. And we went back.
And where did you go back to?
We went, Wolf they wanted him back in his job where he worked. He worked in a hospital for mentally and physically handicapped, and institution, and they wanted him back immediately, and he went there. We didn't have a place to live, but we found first
in what
lived
city
in the institution.
Was it in Baltimore?
In Baltimore, yeah. We went back to Baltimore. And my husband's brother gave us the car. When we gave him the car back that he originally gave us, he said, I kept that car for you. I knew you would be back. So anyhow, we went back, and I was depressed. I was depressed coming back to the States because I wanted to be in Israel, and we couldn't make it in Israel. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But we did come back.
Do your children know your story?
You know, they know our story, but they are not very, very interested in it. I think the little ones are very worried to hear about it. They didn't want to hear about it. I never went into details to tell them the story. The funny thing is that my one daughter, my one son, Micha, got intermarried to a woman that is American, but she is from Japanese background. So she lived in America. She's not guilty of anything, but they probably felt that I had an anti-Japanese feeling. Do you know? I have an anti-German feeling and an anti-Japanese feeling. But they were not, I don't think they were very, he knows now that I'm going to do this. And he said, it's going to be difficult for you. But they were not, they never said, come sit with us and tell us your story. They didn't. No.
Are they themselves involved in Jewish life or in Holocaust remembrance? Or
if they were involved
are they involved at all in Jewish life or in remembering the Holocaust, Yom Shoah, things like that?
From my one son in Massachusetts, in their school, I don't know if they teach it. I don't think they know about the Holocaust. I don't think they know enough about it. I think also the other children don't know enough about it. Some schools have now active teaching in Holocaust. Okay, but they don't know much about it. They know that I was in the camps. We get some money from the Japanese and I always give them the money that I have.
Or you get
I give them everything.
Reparations from the Japanese?
Yes, I tell them this is my Japanese money. I don't need it. And I divide it among the three of them. Exactly. Yeah.
Have you gone out into the community to tell your story?
No, I didn't. I know from my friend that she is from Hungary. She goes to schools and teaches. And she always told me, Trudy, you have to do this. And I said, no, I don't want to do it. I have only once, there is a group here, it's called Lunch and Learn, where you have your sandwich and there's somebody that gives a lecture. And they told me to talk. And I talked about that. I talked about the camps. And it was, I had a map. And it was a very good lecture, I think. And they think it's very difficult for me to talk about it. It's not difficult. In our shul, there was never a lot of pressure. There was not, they sometimes say you should talk, but there was never somebody that came to me, Trudy, please come and talk to us about it. I never talked in our synagogue about it. No.
But when you spoke at this Hadassah group, how did you feel?
When I talked to the people about it,
I
felt very good about it. I have no, I think it's because I was so little that I had no hang-up about it. Completely not. Except that I don't like the Japanese.
Do you have other friends who are survivors, child survivors?
Child survivors, I don't have any friends that is a child survivor. From our camp, no. We had, no, I didn't talk to other children or other survivors, not from Indonesia. From Europe, I know many from Europe. My friend Vera from Hungary. Yeah, I know some, yeah. But not from Indonesia. I met actually one couple. I met one couple, that's very funny. We came back from Israel and we were in the plane and we were talking Dutch. Why would we would not be talking Dutch to each other, talking English to each other. And there was somebody at the back of us and he said, are you Dutch? I said, yes. And we discovered that he was born in Indonesia. He was from there, he was in the camps. We were both, she was Jewish, he was not Jewish, so we became very good friends because we had everything in common. Jewish, camps, Dutch, everything. And they said, I'll give you our address and we're going to meet. And I thought, you know, many times you give your names, you never hear. They called us and we became very good friends. They were very rich. He was actually an obstetrician, and they always told him that if they can sue you until a child that you helped to be born is 20 years old. And they said, you better buy a very expensive house with a pool because they can't take your house away. So the first time we came, we went to visit them far away. And we came close to them. And I said, could that be their house? They had a flag in their thing, in their yard. And we came inside, and it was such a beautiful house with a swimming pool, and the table was so big in the middle you couldn't see each other that was sitting there. And we became very good friends, wonderful friends. And they never sued him, so that's why he became. And then I said, I want you to come to us, but I'm ashamed to invite you to our house because we have a very small townhouse, don't have a swimming pool. But they love to come here, and we met many times, and he actually died. And he gave me some booklets about the camps. He was very much informed about the camps, much more than I was. What happened, pictures and so on. He gave it to me. I didn't know, but he told me everything about the camps, more than I knew. He was older than we are.
Are you involved in your synagogue? Do you celebrate holidays and things like that?
Very much involved in our synagogue, conservative synagogue. We celebrate all the holidays. We fast on Yom Kippur. We will fast on Tisha B'Av, which is coming on Wednesday night. Half a day we fast. But in spite of that, our children intermarried. One married Jewish. Our son went back to Israel. He actually went back to Israel after some time, and his feelings went back, and he went in the army there, got married there, and they came ultimately back to the States because lost his job there. But the other two were intermarried, and I always thought, this is my punishment for going back to the States, that they didn't marry Jewish. But the grandchildren from one, they converted. Our rabbi helped the kids. We have one grandson close by here, and his two children, Evan and Noah, converted to Judaism. They went, yeah.
And you also lost one of your sons. Is
Lost
that right?
one of my sons, yeah. 2 years ago, yeah. Eitan, the oldest one that went back to Israel.
The one who went back to Israel.
Yeah, yeah.
So sorry. Are there any other sort of impacts that you feel this experience has had on your life that has changed you or makes you, unique?
The only thing is, what I actually said a little bit before, feeling Jewish has nothing to do with what you do if you fast or you don't fast, but the feeling of being Jewish after being in a country where there was so much anti-Semitism, where you are scared to say that you're Jewish, where you don't want to hear jokes against Judaism, and I'm coming to Israel, I feel, but I don't know if that is because of the camps or because what happened in Holland with the Germans when we came back. But I feel very, very Jewish. I think most of our friends are Jewish. Mm-hmm. When I was in elementary school in Holland, when I was still, before that was in high school, when we lived in Haarlem, the girl that I met at that time was not Jewish. I'm still friends with her. She lives in Spain, and we are still friends. She was not Jewish. We were the biggest friends that you can imagine. Yeah. We were so poor. I never had nice clothes, but her mother was also poor, but she was sewing dresses, and she had the most beautiful dresses always on. But I wasn't jealous, but I was always thinking, I wished I had a dress like that. It was actually in the camp, what happened in the camp also. It's the only time in my life that I stole. I never steal, but there was a little girl in the first camp that we were in Chihapet. She had earrings, and they were beautiful earrings. And these were not earrings that you need your ears pierced, because I didn't have pierced. I stole the earrings, and I showed it to my mother, and my mother said, "You are going to give it back to her." And that was very difficult for me to give it back to her, because I had to admit that I stole them, but I did.
You did.
Mm-hmm. And now I only steal a little grape in the giant if I want to taste if they're good or not good.
Is there anything special that you want to say to your family or anyone who would be watching this testimony?
I think what is the most important thing is that people never forget, and that there are still, I can't believe that there are still people that deny the Holocaust, that they said it didn't happen. And I think if this helps to teach people, especially as children and when they grow up, I think that is my message that I would like to give, that never to forget. I have never gone back to Germany. When we came back from Israel to Holland and we had to travel by car, we had to go through Germany for some reason. I don't know, it's the maps, I'm not good in geography. We went through and we stayed with a family. I remember they had these stick down blankets and the kids were jumping on it. And I didn't want to say anything against them because they could hear. But we avoided Germany. I've never gone on vacation. I will not go on a cruise because they all go through Germany. And of course we do buy a Japanese car, a Camry.
Well, I think, do you feel like you have anything else, any other memories?
Let me see if I
Yes.
wrote down something that I
anything
that
else
I didn't
that you feel you might
mention.
have.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot to mention that when we went back after the war and we got our silver out, my mother also went back to the people that she gave her dresses and her shoes to. And she so much wanted her dresses back. Because it was only 3.5 years, she was still a young woman. And she said, no, I can't give you that back. We gave you the medicine and she didn't get it back. Okay. So it is the feeling of coming back and being completely, the worst thing to lose is your pictures. Because we didn't have any pictures. They had, after the camps, they had millions of pictures in outside the museum. And you could go there and look if there were pictures. But it is mission impossible to find pictures. So we lost all our pictures. The clothes you can buy again. You know, the money, somehow we started working and it was okay. And my mother remarried, actually. My mother remarried. One bad thing I remember is my mother remarried a non-Jewish man, a wonderful, wonderful man. I was already over 20, or whatever. And when they came to Israel for our wedding, when we went to Israel, we had trouble proving that we were Jewish with the rabbis. They made it so difficult to get married. My sister was married to a rabbi. He had to write a letter from him that I was Jewish. He had to write to his town in South Africa, in Paarl, that he was Jewish. And then the rabbi said, but this is not an Orthodox synagogue. So Wolf said to them, this is a small place. You think they have an Orthodox, a Reform, and a Conservative synagogue in that place? We have only a couple of thousand, I don't know how many people living in Paarl. So anyhow, we had trouble proving that. But after we got married, my father came to the wedding. My mother came, Oom Louis, with her second husband, she came. Wolf's father came to the wedding. His mother had to work in the store. They had a store, and the store could not be without any, she had to work there. We met her later. And when you get married, a couple have to give you away. But the rabbi said, my mother could not give me away because she was remarried to a non-Jewish man. And I cried, and she cried. And I will never forget the Orthodox for doing that. A woman that has saved me, has worked, protected me in the camps with everything, stolen from me, anything. She could not give me away. So it was friends a very good friend that we had in Rehovot that she gave us away. I never forgive them for doing that. They should have told her, but you can walk by yourself. Just walk with her to the chuppah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything else?
Anything else? I'm sure I forget many things. We talked about that. Yeah, there's one thing I didn't mention is after the war, is the atomic bomb, after the atomic bomb, the Japanese, I remember the one that we were always with, he was, like I said, they were never bad to us. Even that I didn't like them because their faces and their eyes was so different. But he cried because his family were killed in that war. And we cried with him. And now I think, how can we cry with him? It is because of what they did that they threw the atomic bomb. Because if they wouldn't have thrown the atomic bomb, we probably would have died. Because the camps would have been longer, they would have done other things with us if they didn't succeed to kill us. But I remember that.
Did you remember hearing about the atomic bomb?
Yeah, I remember from them yes, from them, because his family, I don't know if it was his children, but his family died from the atomic bomb. Yeah. But I always have this feeling. I remember in the Weizmann Institute where I worked, he said I worked with an electron microscope. I don't know if you know it. It takes a whole room, big microscope, huge. He says, we're going to get a Japanese professor visiting us and I want you to show him something. I said, I'm not going to show him anything. I'm only going to say 3 words to him, Yotsuke, Kiri, Nori, and Gabakare. And my boss said to me, you are not going to say that. And of course I didn't. That would be the end of his research program together with this Japanese. Yeah.
Okay.
Is there any other question you want to ask me?
I don't think so. I did want to invite Wolf, your husband, to come in and join you for a few minutes. Here? We have a chair over there.
Wolf, you want to come and sit?
Wolf, do you think you could bring this chair over there? There's a chair over there we put.
Just don't step on that, Wolf. Step on that.
Do we need another
Didn't
mic?
That belong to you, this?
No. Hello.
Hello.
Can you tell us your name and your
My
relationship?
name is Wilfred Berman.
And how are you related to Trudy?
To Trudy, I'm her husband.
Okay. And how did you, do you have some reaction or some comments to make after hearing this interview?
I think she told a very tragic story, but she was very, very young and she's tough.
Do you talk about this story with others outside of the family or in the family?
Very, very little, very few people ask questions, but sometimes I remind people that this is the only woman who never went to elementary school. I haven't met anybody else who did so well subsequently, not going to school at all.
How do you explain that?
She must have a lot of seichel.
That is true. That is true. How will you share this testimony with your family, children and grandchildren?
Sometimes we talk to the kids about it, but they usually listen and they're amazed. And they usually don't ask too many questions because they have so many other things to do.
Do you think this video testimony will change that in any way? Will
I
that...
think if they would see that, be very good. Anybody who sees that, because nobody knows about Jewish internees with the Japanese.
It's an unusual story. Yeah.
It's a very unusual story.
Okay. So, anything else you would like to say to Trudy or to anyone watching?
I can tell you the interesting story how I met Trudy.
Okay.
It was by a complete fluke that I met her. I worked in Tel Shomer Hospital as a physician, and this was in 1963, October. I returned to Israel from overseas, and I got a sort of more senior position in pediatrics in the same hospital where I'd done my internship in 1959. And because I was a little bit more senior, I had to do summaries in Hebrew. And I went to Cheder, and that's about all. I could read and write Hebrew. But what I was reading and writing, I had very little knowledge about. And they said, why don't you go to an ulpan? Everybody goes to an ulpan. I said, fine, I'll go to an ulpan. And I went to an ulpan like 2 evenings a week. And one of those sessions, this is in the greater Tel Aviv area, the ulpan at the time was using very little English, mostly for Romanian and Polish immigrants. And I thought, this is a waste of time for me. I'm not going to learn Hebrew here. And there was a break. And during the break, a woman comes to me, and this is her friend Rick, comes to me and says to me, are there any Dutch boys in the group? I said, sure. There's 3 or 4 Dutch boys over there. Go talk to them. And she goes and talks to them. 5 minutes later, she comes back to me. She says, these boys don't want to go to a party. Would you like to go to a party? I said, I'd love to go to a party. So she said, have you got a friend? I said, I've got a friend. Oh, she said, bring him along. So we went to the party that night. It was at Trudy's apartment that she shares with an English girl who was an English teacher in Israel. And we found out it wasn't a party that we knew about, like we have in South Africa. It was her birthday. So she had a nice, beautiful dinner, which we couldn't eat because we ate a terrible dinner at the hospital. So I think she was a little upset about it, but we had very nice dessert. And then during the conversation, she said, I've got a bicycle in my lift, and I don't know how to assemble it. So I said, I'll come and assemble this bicycle, because I went to school for 12 years on a bicycle in South Africa. And that's how it all started. The rest is history.
Great story. Well, thank you very much. Thank you both very much. Trudy, thank you for that.
Thank you for doing the interview in such a wonderful way.
Thank you. And we're going to show, we'll take a break and show the photos and artifacts that you have assembled.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. When I looked, this booklet is a very beautiful booklet that a friend of mine who was also in a camp in Indonesia gave to me. We actually, I think he never asked the Dutch government to give him some money, but we had difficulties convincing the Germans who gave the money that we were also victims. Very difficult. We read books, he gave us these books, he gave us pictures. It took a long time before we could say that we are. But anyhow, when I looked at this picture, I never realized that there were 20 camps in Java. Java is the biggest island in the Dutch East Indies, Indonesia, about 20 different camps, and I don't even know the names, but our names are on this. Adek, Chihapit, and Tangerang. But
Can you point out the three camps?
yeah, let me look. Can I move this? Let me see. Here, Adek is the first one here. It's in Batavia. And let me see. Let me see Chihapit, if I can find Chihapit. Let me see. Adek. Tangerang. I found Tangerang. I found Adek. I don't think, you know.
Is that it?
Yeah, here is Chihapit.
Okay.
Yeah, here is Chihapit. Chihapit here. Okay, when I looked at this picture, and of course, these pictures were taken, I don't know who made these pictures. We never had cameras, of course, anything. But when I looked at these pictures now, it sort of came back to me a little bit that we were in the barracks on this side, and the keuken, it says keuken, this is all in Dutch, it's kitchen. Here was the dining room where they made the terrible food that they gave us. But I remember going here and that the Iraqi Jews here were somewhere there, where we walked past and where we had a terrible smell. And I don't want to move it. Gudang. They had I saw here, they had and can I move the book? I don't want to move it because it's not focused for you. I don't know what it says here. Exercise room. We didn't have any exercise. Nothing. But it was interesting here, the latrines, the toilets were here somewhere. I will never forget the toilets because it was so filthy. I don't know how we didn't die from diseases instead of getting sick. Yeah, when I look at this picture, this is exactly, I can see my mother standing here, me standing next to her, and telling me to bend down. We wanted to go and bend down. We were busy bending down, standing straight, and then you can go again. And he was walking past with his stick, and if you didn't bend down, and you can see how deep I bent down, very deep. My mother didn't bend down so deeply, but this is exactly what happened. Okay, the Japanese had these hats with these flaps going down. It's very typical. Okay, when I look at these pictures, there's not a special picture that I remember that is at that place and that is at that place, but it just gives you the feeling of being there here. People, I don't know if they're washing themselves, or it said next to it that you kept distance, as if you don't get sick when you keep distance, but the way it is there, you all infect each other. But very simple, the dresses, her arms are so thin, very thin arms. And it just gives you the feeling of here being behind bars, being in the camps. When I looked at these pictures, there's one picture from, in particular, that sort of stuck, that impressed me, and that is this one, because you see the beds where we're sitting on. I don't think we had, this looks like a little mattress. The planks that we have didn't have mattresses, not even thin ones. I think we had sort of mats, like very thin mats that we slept on. But this is how she's writing, and I can just imagine her maybe writing a recipe down, how we were all talking to each other about, there was a lot of conversation going on, and we kept each other going, the women kept each other going. I think they were very strong. Okay, here we couldn't get pictures from all our kids because they're living in different states now, but here's just some pictures that that are very special. All our grandchildren are very special. We've got 11 grandchildren, and they are our life actually at the moment. The top picture on the right is Coralie, who went as a lone soldier to Israel, was there for 3 years, and she had a family that had her over for Shabbat. They adopted her. This is the woman, wonderful woman at the Gaza border where all the shooting is at the moment, and she is still in contact with them. She always went back to them, wonderful. And Coralie was a very special soldier for 3 years. Okay, she caught a terrorist in the very beginning of her service, and she had a special thing on her shoulder for that. That was very special. The picture underneath there, on the right, is a picture from our grandchildren when they come over for Hanukkah. They always sit on the floor and they have a dreidel game with the little savivon, and they play and they play. And this is Evan from our son here, and these are children from our son in Massachusetts on the right. And we have a wonderful, wonderful time. They will always remember Hanukkah, playing the games. Okay, it's not the presents, but being together, playing the games. The kids, actually, these two pictures, the right there at the bottom, and this one, they went on a cruise a very short time ago, I think a year ago. In the winter, they wanted to go somewhere, and our son actually had died. This is our son in Massachusetts, our oldest son. And the kids, they all wanted to go somewhere, and we advised them. She wanted to go to Hawaii. I said, don't go to Hawaii, go on a cruise. You don't have to think about everything. There's entertainment, you go on trips, and there is good food. You even get Indian food because she's from India. My son's wife, there are 40,000 Indian Jews actually in Israel. And they had the time of their lives. Because for every age, for every child, there are activities. She didn't know in the evening who was where, but nobody can run away on a ship. So they all came back and they had a wonderful time. And in fact, is Aviad on that picture? Aviad is all the way on the right. He's going to have his bar mitzvah in Israel in January. And they said, do you want a party? He said, no, I want to go back on a cruise ship. Because they had such a wonderful time. And here they are on an island somewhere. This is Eli. This is Aviad on the right. And this is Reut. And this is Eli. And this is Hila. They are all from the same family in Massachusetts. Let me see, there are 6 children. So one is in Israel, that's 5. So one is not there. Don't know who's there, who is not there, I don't know. But they're beautiful, and they had a wonderful time, great time. This picture here he is from our son here, who lives 35 minutes away from here, from Shai. His graduation, and we celebrated it. His hair was long, and if you think that this is long, he grew it even longer. We couldn't stand it anymore. He didn't say anything, and then suddenly one day we had lunch together, and it was just all gone. And but it sort of looked good on him, and we were very close. We were very close. We were very close to all our grandchildren, except the one in California, because it's so far, and we haven't gone as much there to build up the bonding and to build up the contact that we had with them in Massachusetts and the one here that lives so close by. But we're trying, okay? And this is, of course, a very difficult picture for us to look at, because this is Micha. This is our son isn't that Micha Wolf? On the right with the red shirt. It's Micha and Eitan.
Yeah, that's Micha.
Yes, Micha. Yeah. This is our youngest son who lives in California, in Andover. Anad's family is also from Andover, San Anselmo. And this is Eitan. They're having dinner. I don't know if it's on the ship, because Micha worked as in his gap year between finishing school, between high school and a job. He didn't want to start a real life, so he wanted the year in between, and he worked on a cruise ship as an assistant activity person. He was very, very good always wanted to go in acting, but he was good in that. And he invited all his brothers for free on the ship. And they always say, "How many brothers do you have?" Because they all came all free. So here they had a good time. I think it was on the ship somewhere. Okay.